Dishonored 2 is one of the best stealth games that came out last decade. It blends brutal, gory action perfectly with stealthy movements and opportunities. There are dozens of paths you can take, be it guns blazing or quietly like a shadow. Dishonored 2 is one of those games that were designed for the player to feel free to do whatever he wants, wherever he can imagine, however and whenever he wants. Many games offer this promise, but only a handful actually manage to deliver. Most of them fail because they either turn out to be half-truths or end up being extremely repetitious and boring. Dishonored 2 is a breath of fresh air, despite coming out 2016 and being almost 6 years old at this point. It never feels outdated, and the graphics are probably timeless because of their unique art design. When it first came out in 2016, it was praised as a fantastic game and scored generally great reviews from critics. Unfortunately, it was barely playable and pretty much broken at the time. It was plagued with bugs, game crashes, lags, and horrible stutters. This had a bad effect on the sales, and people soon started dropping negative reviews about it, which in turn had the result that it wasn't able to gather a decent sales number and had to be considered a flop. Arkane Studio games generally tend to be released in an unfinished or broken state, which is unacceptable and does them no favors. And it's a shame because their games are actually really good, be it the Dishonored series or the Prey games. However, all the technical problems have been fixed by now, and it is very unlikely that, should you decide to buy this game, you will experience any game-breaking problems. It runs very well on my RTX 2070 Super and Ryzen 5 3600 on a 144Hz monitor, giving me around 90 to 100 FPS. I've experienced zero problems. This game in general has almost no flaws at all, be it in storytelling, game design, combat, or movement. Of course, that's my personal opinion, and yes, I admit, I am a Dishonored fanboy. But playing this game, you can see how the developers tried to think through every possible scenario the player might take, every possible route or action, and did their best to deliver a unique experience. This game improves on essentially every element of the original, while expanding the universe, lore, and all of your options as a player. I've always been a fan of story-driven games. To me, a good story makes 50% of a game, sometimes even more depending on the genre. It can make or break the game and your experience of it. To me, a perfect game is one that manages to combine good gameplay with its story and world, meaning that the gameplay and the story are not two separate functions, but two that complement each other. Dishonored manages to make story and gameplay. All the gameplay mechanics are explained within the story and you'll never feel like something's out of place. Dishonored 2 takes place years after the events of the first game. Emily Caldwin, the daughter of the murdered Empress Anne of Corvo, is now Empress herself and tries her best to rule as Empress of the Isles. Unfortunately, things aren't as great as they seem, and in the very first level, you lose everything. Delilah appears and takes over the throne with the help of Duke Luca and dark magic, giving you no choice but to flee the city. This is where you get the chance to choose who you want to play, Corvo or Emily. Now, if you choose Corvo, you'll have a slightly different experience. Corvo and Emily have their own unique set of powers and weapons, and some dialogue will be different. Especially Corvo's, which seems a bit darker even if you play on low chaos, although that may come from the voice actor just sounding like Max Payne. Regardless who you choose to play, the story will be the same except for some dialogue moments or options. This gives great replay value, but don't expect a completely different experience on your second playthrough. Throughout the story, you will be experiencing some of the most original and crazy storylines I've ever seen in a video game, such as the Clockwork Mansion or a crack in the slab. The world Arkane created here in Dishonored and Dishonored 2 is unique and attention-grabbing. It is both familiar and unfamiliar, a really fascinating mix of the Victorian era mixed with steampunk and a grim industrial revolution feeling while still having monarchies and all kinds of strange technologies such as robotic clockwork soldiers. Every character you meet and every environment you visit begs you to explore them. All the notes and books you find scattered around the world, all the paintings and equipment, they all give you bits and pieces of lore which fleshes out the world immensely. It feels like it was crafted with careful attention to detail and lots of love. There are no spots on the map, no notes or information that feels out of place. Everything has a purpose, everything has a reason to be where it is, be it to tell you more about the history of a certain character, a certain sect or brotherhood, or just the world. I wanted to look at every single painting and read their plugs because the world is just so interesting. It feels like the designers were really confident in the universe they created and everything seems to fit together perfectly. If you are a fan of Victorian or steampunk type settings, then Dishonored 2 and the Dishonored series in general is definitely something you should check out. In Dishonored 2, every single level is its own unique set piece. You will find some of the most original game levels you have ever experienced. It is mind-blowing how many options the game gives you to approach or finish a mission. It's very similar to the Hitman series in the sense that you can follow the given path and have a fun experience, but you can also not follow it and do whatever you want. There are hundreds of potential ways to approach a mission, so many different paths you can take. Because of how unique these levels are, I never got tired of exploring a new area. There's even a time traveling chapter that allows you to see through time, and you can even go back and forth between these two time periods and use them to your advantage as they are tied in with the gameplay. For example, if you are chased by guards, you could jump in time to flee or hide in a certain corner to lay an ambush. Your actions in the past will also have a direct influence on the future. I was blown away by how unique this is. I finished Dishonored 2 multiple times, my first playthrough being with Corvo and my second with Emily. I love them both, but if I had to choose, I'd say that Emily is the better choice because the overall story is mostly centered around her. Emily's abilities are a bit more suited for a more stealth and non-lethal walkthrough, while Corvo's powers are more violent. That said, you can absolutely use both of them if you want to play this game in a violent way. Emily has some interesting unique powers, like one that turns you into a demonic shadow that can rip its enemies in half. And yes, this game can be very gory at times. Blood will flow, heads and arms will be torn apart, and you will be able to see all of that. You can cut off an enemy's head, pick it up and throw it towards other NPCs to create fear and confusion. The world of Dishonored 2 is truly a sandbox for you to figure out how things work and how you can manipulate things to your advantage. It doesn't matter whether you decide to play violent, non-lethal or a mix of both, you will almost always have a unique experience. Every ability and gadget that you get just adds more tools for toying with your enemies. The swordplay is a bit more in depth than in Dishonored 1 and a lot of fun. When parrying, you can actually stun your enemy and use that to your advantage. Sword fighting feels straight out of a movie and is very rewarding, but can also be punishable. You do have to fight for your life. Sword fights are dynamic, violent and intense with lots of animations. Once you get into your first sword fight, you might even regret going for a non-lethal playthrough because of how satisfying it is to kill people in Dishonored 2. Dishonored 1 had a unique visual style reminiscent of an oil painting. It was unique and praised. Personally, I was never a big fan of that oil painting art style and wished for a bit more clearer colors and visuals. And Dishonored 2 did just that. It still looks unique, but it is much sharper and clearer. The texture work and lighting in the game is absolutely beautiful. Everything looks great and the attention to detail is crazy, be it on characters or the environment. Every area is a unique and exciting place to explore. These were all the points I wanted to cover on my review for Dishonored 2. I hope you guys will give this game a try, especially since you can get it for really cheap with all the DLCs included. Dishonored 2 is probably one of my favorite games of the last decade and an absolute joy to play through. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a like and a comment, subscribe for more content like this.